Hello, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Crooked Illness. As you can see from today's title, Ending the Stigma Associated with Mental Illness, this is what we are going to be getting into today. This episode is all about the stigma that is often associated with mental illness. My guest today, Jay Shifman, is going to join me in this conversation about stigma, what it is, what it means, and how to overcome it. Jay is a mental health and substance misuse and recovery speaker, coach, and advocate, and the host of the Choose Your Struggle podcast. He is 10 years in recovery and survived multiple suicide attempts and a drug overdose. As a result of these experiences, he has made it his mission to fight to end stigma by telling his recovery story and advocating for opportunities for others to do the same. So without further ado, welcome Jay to the podcast.
That was expertly done. I do a lot of these, and that was flawless. I'm very impressed.
Thank you. I'm really excited to have you here today.
Thank you.
We had a great conversation, so let's just jump right in. So can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to become a coach?
Yeah. So as you related in my intro, I've lived through some stuff. And, my goal with coaching, my goal with speaking, besides ending the stigma, is essentially, look, I went through this and I learned a lot along the way. I mean, you can't not, right? I mean, it as horrible as all of it was, I am a completely different person today based on living through those experiences. Yeah. And I believe that a lot of them taught me things that are valuable lessons that I can impart to other people. And I don't want anyone else to have to live through what I lived through to learn those valuable lessons, right? So if I can relate some of that to people through speaking, through these interviews, through coaching, then I've had my impact, and it's all been worth something.
Yeah. Awesome. Because I know you shared your story with me, and I thought that was really powerful. That's why I wanted you to come on here and talk about your business, what you do, how you coach people. And I really like the name of your podcast, Choose Your Struggle podcast. So Can you get into a little bit about what does that mean to you? Choose Your Struggle.
Definitely. So Choose Your Struggle is my business. It's my hashtag. It's, as you said, it's my podcast. It was born about 5 years ago, the first time I spoke on stage. Now, I'm 10 years in recovery as of this spring, so now a little bit longer. And for the first 5 years, I didn't tell people about this. I mean, like we're talking about today, that stigma is real, and I lived it. And I was talking about it the other day, and someone asked me a question that I rarely get asked, and that was, why were you quiet about it? And like, basically the question was, did someone tell you shouldn't tell people? And the answer is no. I mean, nobody said, don't tell anyone about this, live quietly. It was the internalized stigma. It was the living in this society, the things that you pick up and you hear, that you read about people who use drugs, people who struggle with substance misuse, people who struggle with mental health. Now, you got to remember also that this was, I struggled in the 90s and the 2000s and into the 2010s. So very different than where we are today, where people are starting to open up about it. And I'm so glad that that's starting to change. Not that we don't have a long way to go, but very different back then. And so for me, there wasn't that sort of experience where somebody said, don't talk about it. It was just completely internalized. And the first time I spoke about it, it took a lot to get me up on that stage. And what I finally sort of rallied around was this idea that I hadn't been embracing this message to my own self that I had failed. That my struggles had meant that I had failed in some way. And in the reality was, it's the opposite, right? I mean, I was on so many chemicals every day when I was struggling with substances. As you said in my intro, I attempted suicide twice. I overdosed, and I'm still here. That is a hell of a victory. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
So in that way, the struggle was that at the time, I didn't get to choose what was going on in my life. I was a completely and totally given up to this struggle of being a person every day, avoiding withdrawal, just going through the everyday throes of addiction. And now I get to choose what I struggle for. And so that is this. It's these issues of substance misuse and mental health, and preaching the fact that recovery is possible.
Yeah, because that's huge. And I think the biggest point that you said is that you weren't able to choose your struggle because you were struggling at that time. You were dealing with the addiction. You were dealing with what you were going through. So you didn't really have the opportunity to even choose
That's
what
right.
your struggle was or really understand about that. And I think that's really important that the work that you're doing is helping people understand that and realize that and learn that. And especially when we're talking about stigma, that, like you said, the stigma is real. It's real.
Yeah.
It's there. And sometimes it's not always, it's different for everyone, right? So maybe someone might be uncomfortable or not want to share things that they've gone through or things related to mental health, substance misuse. But then we have that internal stigma, like you mentioned, where it's inside of us. And we
That's right.
carry that shame that you mentioned that you were going through recovery at the time. So I remember you told me you didn't go out and tell everyone, right? Like, I'm in recovery. This is what's going on.
That's
You
right.
told a few close people because it was something that you were going through and you didn't want to, broadcast that and tell everybody. But I think it's really important that you're doing that and you're speaking about it and you're getting the word out related to these struggles that people are going through, because I think it's helping other people see and look at you and say, okay, if this guy can get on a stage and share his story and open up and talk about his things, then maybe I can open up to my mom, my dad, my sister, my boyfriend, somebody.
Yep.
And I think that is extremely important and very powerful. So, if you could talk about, how did you go about ending the stigma for yourself personally associated with mental health?
That's a great question, and I love you touched on something that I want to
Mhm.
just hit home, and that is again something that I don't even talk about that much, and it's more than just me. Like, this
Mhm.
isn't about me. I love
Mhm.
telling my story. I love talking about these issues because of the conversations it starts and because of the
Mhm.
doors it's open. So, perfect example. Somebody reached out to me earlier today about telling my story, and when they related to me the opportunity, I said, that sounds amazing. I would love to do it. I can think of a couple people who would be a better fit for you. Would you mind if
Mhm.
I introduce you? And so it would be very easy for me to jump at every opportunity, but
Mhm.
again, this isn't about me. This is
Yeah.
about making a real impact. And if I'm not the right fit, I don't want to take that up because who knows how many doors I may close inadvertently. So
Mhm.
that just I appreciate you hitting on that because it's so important. For me
Mhm.
personally, though, like I said, I and like you laid out that I did see it as a mark of shame for a solid 5 years.
Mhm.
And I told very few people, even people who were in my life before, who knew that I was struggling. And then all of a sudden I disappeared for a year when I was, going away and getting it under control and all that kind of stuff. And then I
Mhm.
came back and they didn't really know what had happened. So 5 years into recovery, a buddy of mine who runs an organization in Cincinnati, it's called Cincy Stories, where I'm from, Cincinnati, Ohio, and
Mhm.
they have these events. It's a storytelling event, which are just phenomenal.
Oh, wow.
And they invite influential or well-known people in the city to come up and tell their origin story or sort of how they came to be who they are today.
Wow.
And he came up to me. He's like, "I'd love for you to be the sort of second closer on this thing," which is it's a big deal. I mean, these are
Yeah.
150 people in the audience.
Wow.
And he knew my story. I was like, man, there's just no way in hell that's going to happen. I was like, that's not, there's no way. And he asked me again about a month later, and I was, no, there's no way. He asked me a third time, and again, I was like, dude, you got to stop asking me. This is never going to happen. And then I went home. I just happened to be having dinner with my parents that night. And I walked into my dad's office. He was at home. I still remember this scene perfectly. He's
Mhm.
sitting there in his office reading the New York Times. And I was like, we started talking, and he's got the paper still in front of him, as dads do. And
Mhm.
I mentioned that this thing was happening, that, yeah, this buddy's trying to get me to do, whatever.
Mhm.
And he lowers the paper and looks at me and was like, why would you not do it? And I said, well, I'm afraid. I mean, there's a big stigma around this. And he looks at me and he goes, fear is never a good reason not to do something. And then
Wow.
just slowly lifts the paper back up again, as if he didn't realize he just blew up my entire world. So I'm just like stunned, after that. And here's the thing is that my parents were not like super open with my struggles either. So it wasn't even him saying, I think you could do some good with this story. It was more just a look, if you don't want to do it, don't do it. But if you're not doing it because you're afraid, you're wasting a beautiful opportunity. So that was the impetus behind finally telling it. And then the result that night was really what kept the ball going, because
Wow.
I came off stage. I walked over to, you know, the side area where I was sure that I was just going to be a pariah now. And the crush of people that came up to me, friends giving me hugs, people I didn't know who were like, I want to talk to you because my brother's struggling, or whatever the case is. I was instantly invited to do another speaking opportunity literally 2 weeks later.
Wow.
And the ball just kept rolling from there. So it made me, I sort of lived this thing that I teach, which is that all of this that you're afraid of, it 100% is happening in your head, because none of it's real. And for me, that was 100% the case. None of it was real. I was so terrified of being shunned, of being a pariah after I admitted, you know, what had happened to me, and none of it happened. I mean, 0%.
Wow. I think that's so, like, the moment you just described where you were talking to your dad and he put the paper down, I was like, why wouldn't you do it? And how that just hit you. And you were like, okay, I'm going to do it. And I feel like sometimes that's really all it takes, is someone pushing you, telling you, and giving you that motivation. Because I feel like if it's so internal, like if you're dealing with stigma and for years and years and years, and you've been telling yourself these stories of, I can't talk about it, I can't tell anyone, I can't do this, we kind of prevent ourselves from even being able to take those opportunities because we've already shut it down. You know, even because, like you mentioned, that guy came to you 3 times and was like, hey, you want to do this? You're like, no. Want to do it? No. Want to do it? No. And don't ask me again. So I feel like it's because we already shut it down ourselves. And then the fact that you did that and the response that you got from that, and people coming to you and saying, hey, you know, my brother's dealing with this, and would you like to speak at this? It opened all those doors that you wouldn't even have had if you didn't do it. So, but it's hard. It really is, when you talk about, because it's also different for everyone, like with their own stigma, with what they're dealing with. And I think it's really important that, you know, people like you show your story and talk about your experience with that, because it helps people see that and connect with you and say, okay, well, you know, he did this, so maybe I can try to overcome mine.
Yeah, 100%. And I get a lot of those messages, and it makes all of this worth it when somebody reaches out and was like, you know, I decided to do this. Or a perfect example is in my coaching, I get people who say, I heard you speak, you know, I want to work with you because of that. And so it gives me a little bit of that authority to say, you know, I'm not just up here talking about this, I lived it. And that's one of the lessons I try to coach on, is that, to what you were talking about earlier, there are a lot of those rules that we don't even realize that we live by, that are built on nothing. And just because we've told ourselves enough time, it's like, you know, it's like that old adage that if you tell a lie enough times, it becomes a truth. We live by a lot of those, and we just never question them. And so one of the things that I work on with clients is, let's get to recognizing some of those. Now, whether you want to challenge them and move past it, like, I would encourage you to, at the very least, challenge it. Some of them, I mean, maybe they're enough of a part of you that they're going to keep being a part of you. But other ones, when you start to realize that there's no basis to a lot of what these rules are that you live by, it's easy to discard that and move past it. But you can't get there without being uncomfortable for a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important, because especially the part about being uncomfortable. And I feel like a lot of people don't like that feeling. Like, you know, when you're first starting to get over the stigma, get to open up, sometimes people have this reaction of, I don't like this. I don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't want to have to put myself in these situations where, you know, I'm talking about something that happened to me or I went through, and then what if, you know, there's all these what ifs of, what if this doesn't work the way I want it to? What if this person doesn't, you know, want to be my friend or whatever? And there's always these scenarios that we create. And that goes with what you just said of these rules that we live by, that we created, that aren't even real, but we continue to live by them because it's what we tell ourselves all the time on a daily basis. So I feel like breaking that and really getting over that comes with making yourself uncomfortable and doing things like what you did, where you got on stage, you did that, you talked to those people, and it was something that you didn't want to do, but you did it. So
yeah, and growth happens when you're willing to push past the uncomfortable, but it's hard. And so there a lot of us sort of live in those parameters that we create because it's easier to just sit there than it is to challenge some of these things that we hold dear to us.
yeah, no, I mean, 100%. I agree with that. So what advice would you give to somebody who is struggling to overcome a stigma that they have about mental health, addiction, or something like that? What would you tell that person who is struggling with that?
Yeah, so I would say number one is be willing to challenge. And let me give you a perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that I'm literally coaching somebody on tomorrow.
Wow.
Um, the For a long time, for as long as there has been treatment in sort of our society for issues of
Mm-hmm.
substance misuse, the basis of that treatment has been the 12-step approach, and that is you live a completely sober life and all that kind of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's nothing wrong with 12-step. It's helped millions of people, but there are now more tried and true methods for a lot of these substances that
Mm-hmm.
have not gotten a chance to be used to the extent they should for a lot of reasons. Politics comes into play and a whole bunch of things. But a
Mm-hmm.
major reason is that if you ask the average person how you get into recovery, their answer is 12-step. It's
Mm-hmm.
AA, it's NA, whatever the case is. So there are a lot of people who aren't even willing to try these other methods
Mm.
because there is so much stigma against anything that isn't 12-step. Now,
Mm.
again, this isn't harping on 12-step. That's not the point of this. It's
Mm-hmm.
the point that the issue is thinking that there's only one way, when in reality, there are a lot of ways that aren't being utilized because people get this left and right, that you go into these AA rooms and they'll even say, oh, you're not in recovery if you're using, whatever the case is, Suboxone or
Mm-hmm.
these methods that are scientific in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Or I've had people tell me, literally, this just happened last week. I gave a speech and someone called me afterwards and said, your story is so amazing, but I got to tell you, she literally said this, I don't think you have it in you to stay in recovery long term.
Oh,
And I said,
wow.
now why?
Wow.
I was like, that's super interesting. And I wasn't mad about it.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
knew what the answer was already coming because I've heard this
Yeah.
before. And so I was like,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. Tell me why. And she said, well, it just, you can't stay in recovery without using 12-step. And I said, yeah, I'm going to be honest. I really hope you're wrong because I'm 10 years in and I don't have any plans to go back. And I also have no plans to, use 12-step because I haven't
Wow.
before. So she wasn't trying to be offensive to me. She
Yeah,
just
yeah.
had that so ingrained in her
Mm-hmm.
that it's the only way. And in reality, it's just a way that works for some people and doesn't work for others. So all of that is to say, be willing to challenge yourself if
Mm-hmm.
there is no good reason for what you are thinking. And
Wow.
now you may think there's a good reason, but then you have to step outside of your comfort zone. And we have this beautiful tool now. It's called the internet. You can pretty
Mm-hmm.
much find answers to a lot of your questions, but yet
Mm-hmm.
people aren't willing to do that searching because they're just so sure of these things that have
Mm.
been deeply ingrained in them. So be willing to challenge. That's number one. And number two is reach out. There is
Mm-hmm.
always somebody there. And we have a saying that in this work that says, we'd rather spend 2 hours talking to you today than 2 hours attending your funeral tomorrow.
Yeah.
So do not suffer in silence. Whether you've tried everything before and you're out of hope, or you haven't tried anything and you have you have no idea where
Mm-hmm.
to turn, there is somebody there for you. Reach out. You'll find the right person. By the way, quick shout out. I am super active in the recovery scene on Reddit.
Mm-hmm.
Reddit's not the greatest thing in the world, but a lot of people reach out there because you can do it anonymously. You can do it in a
Mm.
way that is very safe and very
Mm-hmm.
quiet. And so I would definitely advocate that, be careful because there's some trolls out there and some really nasty people,
Yeah.
but there are ways for you to reach out and do so in a very safe way without committing anything. And things like Reddit give you that opportunity.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I feel like what you said right there about challenging yourself and also reaching out to people is huge, because like what you mentioned with the woman who told you you can't stay in recovery because of 12 step, you're not doing 12 step. And I feel like that's very true, is that a lot of these things that we see, relating to treating addiction or getting recovery or getting help with that, there's always, a thing that we look to that's okay. like 12 step, that's okay. Or, oh wait, you're going to try to get better by doing that. No, it's like, you got to do it this way. It has to be this way. And I feel like that's huge that you brought that up, because there are so many other methods and ways and things that people have access to, like you mentioned, the internet and things like that are helpful and can help that person get the help they need in the way that they need it. Because like you said, not to talk badly about 12 step and all that it's done for so many people, but there are other options out there as well. So,
well, and what's so sad is, obviously this is not unique to the world of mental health and substance misuse, but it's people who have painted themselves into a box and then are really afraid of challenging that, because it would mean that whether they made a mistake or maybe they didn't have to do all that work. And, again, 12 step is a great example of that, but also I get repeatedly comments on Facebook, on LinkedIn. I get emails from people who always with a PhD saying you have no right to be doing the work you do. And it's always the same thing. And again, at this point, I don't really let it bother me anymore, because I know what their argument is. And that is that they've worked their entire life to have the knowledge. They are therapists and I don't have a PhD. So who am I to be? And essentially it's get out of my sandbox. And at the end of the day, what I say to these people, and none of them ever come around to my way of thinking, I don't really care. It's that we need all hands on deck here. I'm not trying to be my clients. I'm not trying to be their therapist. In fact, that's the first thing I tell them. It's also, I constantly remind them, I think you should also be seeing a therapist. But let's be honest here. We're not batting 1,000. Every year, 125,000 Americans are dying over that to just overdose and suicide, just those two. Wow. If that's the case, you have no right to tell me not to be doing this work. In fact, we could all be doing this work because we are failing miserably.
No, 100%. And I feel like that's huge, is because I get that perspective though, like someone coming to you, with this degree and with the training and with all that, and then they are offended or think you shouldn't be doing what you're doing because of the way that they think and the way that they've been doing things. And I feel like there's always, you're always going to come in contact with people who are like that and have a view that it has to be this way. And it's very difficult to sometimes, convince that person that there is other options, there is other avenues, there are other methods, because they think that their way is the only way that's working, the only way that's been proven to work. And I also agree with what you said, where, you're not going to let that offend you, because you understand the argument, where they're coming from, maybe that person doesn't mean to offend you or mean to harm you. Maybe that's just the way that they think and the way that they've been doing things, and they wanted to express that to you. And I feel like it's really good that you understand that and that, because I would hate for you to not to stop doing the work that you're doing because of these messages that you are receiving or things that you're hearing. Because like you said, according to the statistics, there's a lot that is going wrong. There's a lot that, we're failing at. So, we could use whoever we can to help in any way. So I think that's really important. So
yeah, I mean, it definitely got to me early on when I first started doing this work, but over time, I mean, when you have enough of the sort of built up goodwill and people who are receptive to what you're putting down, it's easy to then move away from them and say, all right, we've got something here. And I just dropped my this week's version of my podcast and the Choose Your Struggle podcast for everybody listening. And I was interviewing a guy named Frederick Shagog, who is like me, lived experience, is a speaker, a coach, all that kind of stuff. And he gets this a lot too. And so we were commiserating on how we, deal with this. And he was talking about how he went to a conference and was speaking. And afterwards, someone came up to him and said, that was all well and good, but, I didn't really take that much from you because you don't have a degree. And he said to her, like, and I love this, well, did you live through, what I went through? And she said, no. And he's like, well, then I'm not going to take that much from you because you didn't live, you don't have the degree that I care about. And that's the life experience degree. And so it's something that a lot of us are pushing for. You go to these events and these conferences and these TED Talks. TED is the worst with this. And their entire panel is researchers. And don't get me wrong, thank you for your work. We need more
Mm-hmm.
people doing that. But if every single person on your list is someone who's done research and doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have lived experience, there's
Mm.
something wrong there, because you can research this thing for 50, 60, 70 years. You're never going to know what it feels like to spend your mornings wrapped around a toilet going through withdrawal. And
Mm.
thank God that you don't have that experience.
Yeah.
But also, you need me up on that table because I can be relating to people in a way that you can't. So
Mm.
we both need to be coming to this thing. And when you're slamming the door in my face, it's only doing yourself and your audience a disharm.
Mm-hmm. No, that is so true because of the experience that you've had, the things that you've lived through and dealt with, from your perspective what that's like. So I feel like that's very valuable to someone who is trying to recover, or trying to learn about this, or even somebody who just wants to learn about addiction, who wants to learn more, who wants to understand it better. And I agree, it's incredible to have people who've dedicated their time and energy to doing research and things like that. But you also need people who have been there, who've lived through that, who've, had days where they're going through withdrawals, struggling, all the things that come with that. And that experience, that real life experience of living through that, is so valuable and necessary and important. And I just think it's great, the work that you're doing with your clients, with your podcast, all of that, and getting that message out there, getting that across, and communicating that in a way that can reach people and have them take something away from that and really, resonate with them and be helpful to them. So
Well, thank you. I appreciate
yeah. No, 100%, because it's true. And I'll go on a rant, but I don't want to go on a rant right now. So I'd rather hear from you. So can you tell me, just tell us where can people learn more about you and the work that you are doing?
Definitely. So you can find me, my podcast, the Choose Your Struggle podcast, wherever it's on all the platforms.
Mm-hmm.
And my website is jshifman.com, which is JAYSHIFMAN.com. Search for Jay Shifman on LinkedIn, for Choose Your Struggle, which is, again, my brand, on Twitter and on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Instagram, I'm the next Shifman if you want to find me. I think mostly I post pictures of my dog. So yeah, go find me on Instagram because she's adorable.
Yeah, yes, on Instagram, and check out his podcast. It's amazing, the work that you're doing, the website. I remember when I first connected with you, I clicked on your website and I was like, wow. I was like, he has it together. I was like, wow. I was like, look at this. I was like, everything was presented so easily to understand, your message, what you do, the work that you've done. And I was like, okay.
Well, thank you.
We're gonna do an episode, because
I do want to say, I mean, thank you. And I've worked really hard to cultivate that image, but I mean, I hired people to make my website look good.
Yeah.
I've been doing this on the side now for 5 years and sort of full time for a year and a half. And I'm really lucky that I love it. Because none of us are getting rich doing this work, and it's hard at times, and there are nights where it's tough going to bed after working with a client that's really struggling, and but it makes it all worth it when you see that victory for them, and when people I'll give a speech and someone will reach out, like I said earlier, and say, God, I really want to connect you with my brother, or this was sometimes they just want to talk because they know you understand, and those are the moments that this is really worth it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can clearly see just through talking to you and having this conversation that you are so passionate and you love what you do. You love what you do. You enjoy it. And that comes through and it shows. And I feel like that's how you're able to connect with people and really form that relationship and be such a big help to them, because like this episode is all about, the stigma is there. But it's possible to overcome that. And you have clearly done that. And, your work is evidence of that. And, being able to relate that to others and just spread that message of, stigma's real, it's there. And, I don't know when it's ever going to be 100% gone from this world. I don't, no one knows, but what we can do is we can work together to overcome that, to get the message out there, to speak more about mental health, mental illness, substance abuse, and all of those things, to really help people, help them feel comfortable, help them feel like they can recover, help them feel like they can be happy. So
Yeah, so let me drop a couple of tips on your listeners, because
yes.
these are the little things that we can do every day.
Mm-hmm.
So number one, if you're a guy, this is directly to guys, and
Mm-hmm.
I've got tips for everybody in a second, but just for guys. There was a study that was released in Psychology Today in, I don't know, January, February, sometime before COVID, which could have been 10 years ago at this point. We, who knows?
Yeah.
But this study found that in their sample of male relationships, 95% of the conversations revolved around three topics. Paris, do you want to try to guess those three topics?
Okay. Sex, money, and food.
You're very close. So they didn't put sex, but it was women. Women were
Yeah.
number one.
Yeah.
Sports was number two.
Okay.
And media, so movies and music, were number three.
Oh,
And
okay.
video games were in that.
Yeah.
95% of all conversations between the closest male friends were those three topics. And
Wow.
they gave these examples where, like, one dude was like, I've been homeless for a year now and my best friends don't know. One of them
Wow.
was, I got divorced 2 years ago and my best friends have no idea. And it's because men, we don't feel comfortable opening up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I read that, I remember this. I was sitting in a coffee shop, again, pre-COVID. I missed that. And I read that and it just hit me. And so I just sat there for a minute, like, digesting that. I started thinking about my own closest relationships. And I've been married for a year and a half now. So, my groomsmen and all that kind of stuff were the first guys that came to my mind. And I started realizing that is so true with my
Wow.
closest friends. At the time, my wife and I were going through a rough patch. And I mean, we're over it. We're fine. But none of my friends knew that. They didn't know that I was hating living down here in South Carolina. And so what I did was I reached out to all of them individually. I started sending all of them texts. And I said, here's what I just read. I'm instituting a new rule. We can talk about those topics. And don't get me wrong, I love talking about those topics. But we also then have to talk about something else.
Mm-hmm.
So it has created closeness with these relationships that I never had before. Two of the guys are my best friends since one of them I was 6 years old, the other one I was 12.
Aww.
And we had never talked about these deeper issues. And now we do all the time. And it's because you have to make a conscious change. So my call to guys who are listening to this is break that cycle. I'm not telling you can't talk about sports, women, and media, and as you said, food is also a big one, and all these other topics that we all care about. I'm not saying you can't do that, but I'm also saying mix it up and tell them how you are as a person, how you're feeling. As I like to say, tell your friends, what you're struggling for and how you're struggling currently.
Yeah.
Those are so important. And if we can minimize and if we can return or turn away from this idea that struggle, that failure is in some way a bad thing, we can start to make change and start to break down this wall of stigma that we've built. Because if you're okay to struggle, if you're okay to fail, then reaching out to get help is nothing.
Wow.
And we're just not there yet. So that's the key for everybody. For men, it's those particular topics. But next time you see somebody you love, it could be calling them right now. Ask them how they are and don't take that BS, oh, I'm fine, as an answer. You know what I mean? Because if you walked up to someone that you care about, and again, don't get too close to COVID, but if you walked up to someone and said, how are you? And they said anything other than fine, you would be caught because you're already ready to respond when they ask you how you are, because that's just our greeting. So try to break through that. Have a real conversation about things going on in your life, even if they're uncomfortable, because if this person actually matters to you, you don't want to get to a point where you realize you know nothing about them.
Wow. No, that is so true. Just in everyday interactions, like if you see somebody that you're close with that we always do this, like, hey, how are you? Good. How are you? Good. Okay, get into what we're going to say. And I feel like sometimes we just bulldoze over that. Like, oh, how are you? And so someone could say, I'm terrible. One time I actually did that as an experiment. I remember I literally did that. I had one of my friends was talking to me and then she was like, how are you? And I was like, I'm actually just bad, really bad. And she goes, oh, okay. And then next thing, and I was like, what? I was like, because I think it's a lot of the times is people sometimes don't know what to say. If someone says, oh, I'm not good, or this is going on, we're like, oh, that sucks. Okay. Anyway, let's talk about, people always want to, let's change it to something good,
Yeah.
happy. Let's not talk about that. But I think it's so important. If you love someone, if you care for someone, if you have someone you're close to, or even someone you don't know, if you see that someone is clearly not doing well, they're struggling, something's going on, talk to them.
Yeah.
Let them, if they're not comfortable talking to you, try to see what you can do to help them in some kind of a way, because I think
Yeah.
it's huge.
We have a saying down here in the South that is "bless your heart," which I'm sure everybody has
Yeah.
heard. Which down here means it can mean everything from "f you" to we're not going to talk about that to "oh sweetie, don't no, that's uncomfortable," And I get it a lot, and I hate it. I
Yeah.
hate this
Yeah.
because they're always on the topics that I care about. They're always
Mm.
about mental health, substance misuse. You brought up sex earlier, and
Mm-hmm.
it we're I thought we were over this. This was such a
Yeah.
90s thing. Oh, if we talk about sex, kids are going to have sex. No, they're going to want to
Y-
have sex anyways. If we
yeah.
don't talk about it, then they have bad practices.
Oh
The
yeah.
sad part is that still exists in a lot of places. And with
Mm-hmm.
around drug use, that is still the name of the game. There's this idea that if you tell kids about drug use, they're all going to want to use drugs. No, they're all
Mm-hmm.
going to want to use drugs anyways. We need to teach them how to do so safely, and
Mm-hmm.
then we can stop having all these bad effects.
Yeah. Yeah, no, really just to have those conversations with people and get that out there, because I agree with you 100%. Like when we talk about things that seem they're not painted in a good way. So if we're talking about something, drug use, sex, whatever it is that people have this thing where they don't feel like they want to hear about it, they don't want to talk about it, but I feel like if we have these conversations and we start to do that more and open those doors for people to learn more, it creates a lot of things that are helpful to those people and to even ourselves. Just really getting that out there and having that talk and sharing our experience and doing that in hopes that maybe something that we say is going to help somebody else in some kind of a way. So,
Yeah, and I have so right on that, I have a saying on my podcast, which is empathy begets empathy and vulnerability begets vulnerability. So
mhm.
if you're trying to talk to someone and they're not really feeling it, the way
Mhm.
to open that door is by being vulnerable yourself, because we
Yeah.
as humans, it's in us, right? I mean, if you
Mhm.
see somebody crying, your first thought is, "Oh my God, I want to help them." Like it's
Yeah.
not even a conscious thing. You don't decide to do it. You just see,
Mhm.
you have this feeling in you, this need to help them in some way.
Mhm.
So if somebody is closed off and they're struggling and they're just not saying anything to you, start telling them like, man, I'm really struggling with this or whatever the case is. And that opens that door because it shows them, oh, we can talk about this. You're going to listen to me, and that person will reciprocate.
No, that is very true. When we show vulnerability to somebody in that way, that will not always 100% make them feel like they can do the same back, but it opens that door for them to really see, okay, I'm talking to a real person. I'm
That's right.
talking to someone who has real feelings and has felt something, because I feel like sometimes we can be so closed off and almost seem like we're cold, even though we're not trying to do that all the time. It can come off that way. So I feel like if the more we get comfortable with being vulnerable, the more we are able to have better relationships. Like you mentioned with your best friends, that you
Mhm.
guys now talk about these things that you didn't talk about before. You're able to connect on a deeper level with them and show them like, hey, this is what happened to me. This is what I went through. And then maybe they can turn around and say, wow, like I had no idea. I didn't know that. And then they'll open up to you. And then it forms that connection where maybe that person never told anybody that. Maybe
Right.
that person never even had plans of talking about that. And now they did. So,
And that happened, and I'm really lucky that I'm just wired in that way. I hate small talk. I hate it.
yeah.
I hate it. And down here in the South, like that's entire relationships exist on small talk, and I just can't
yeah.
stand it.
Yeah.
So I will be in situations where I just like I'm over it. I snap and I'm like, all right, I'm done. So, and I'll just launch into a topic that actually matters to me.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are just like, okay, and they're gone. And other times people are like, oh, are we doing this? And so like,
Yeah.
I was at a networking event again pre-COVID, and I'm standing at the bar talking to a bunch of people. and I'm just fucking tired of this small talk. I can't take it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
launch into my recovery story because I'm like, I'm bored as hell. I'm going to tell this.
Yeah.
And a couple of people are just like, okay. And they leave. They just walk
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
But other people gravitate over. And to your point, this one woman goes, wow, let me tell you mine, and goes into it. And at the end, she's bawling. There's like 8 of us standing there. And she goes, I've
Wow.
never told anyone that story
Wow.
before. And we're all having this conversation because I just couldn't take the small talk anymore.
Yeah. No, I love that because I'm the same way. I feel like I've always been like that where sometimes people think I overshare, right? Because I say what's on my mind. I say what's going on and things like that. And sometimes it makes people uncomfortable. Like
Yeah.
they're like, no, like this person, no, her, no. And then other people will hear that and say, wow, I have something that I can share as well that's similar. And then we have this thing, and then
Yeah.
it's a connection, and it's great. I mean,
Yeah.
I love that about people who can actually do that and come out and say these things that make them vulnerable. I think it's great, and I think it's beautiful, and I think it's it's great, really. So
Yeah, and I think with social media, it's made it very easy to, I hate the term overshare because it's like by whose definition. But like
yeah.
one thing that I love is if I'm on like a long, if I post something that's very vulnerable, or especially on
Mm-hmm.
Twitter where it's like I'm gonna, because it's Twitter, but why hold back about anything? When
Yeah.
I see that I've lost a lot of followers, I'm like, all right,
Mm-hmm.
I did something right today. You know what I mean? Because like
Yeah.
if you're
Yeah.
not with it, if you're not down with that, you're gonna go away, and that's fine. If you're not down for this journey, I'm okay with that. I feel it.
Yeah.
But when I see that a bunch of people have flocked away, it's like, all right, I definitely went beyond their comfort zone today, and I'm okay with that.
Wow. Well, that's true. That is true. Well, this was a great episode, and you guys need to check him out. Choose Your Struggle podcast, and I will link his information in the description of this episode. And thank you so much for making the time to come on, have this conversation. I really enjoyed talking with you. You're awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun, and I love what you're doing. Keep it up. And yes, your listeners, please reach out if you're struggling. Reach out to me. Reach out to Paris already. I know you're a person who will be there if somebody needs it.
Hmm.
Don't suffer in silence. Do not suffer in silence. Reach out. Somebody will be there.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. I love that. All right. Okay. Bye, Jay.